A millionaire comes home early to his beautiful single-story estate and nearly passes out from what he sees. The black sedan's engine shut off with a barely audible whisper over the white gravel of the main driveway. The silence that followed should have been comforting. The sweet sound of home, after 3 endless weeks of cold negotiations in boardrooms across the ocean. Don Julian Aragao, a man whose sheer presence used to command respect in the world's major shipping ports, felt strangely light as he unbuckled his seatbelt. He glanced at his watch. 3 p.m. He'd managed to move his flight up by 12 hours. A meticulously calculated surprise to see his fiancé Valeria's smile and to hug his son Matteo before dinner. He stepped out of the car without a sound, signaling the chauffeur with a discreet wave not to unload the bags just yet. He wanted to slip in like a ghost. He wanted to savor that childlike anticipation of surprising his family. The afternoon air was warm, heavy with the sweet scent of jasmine that his late wife had planted so many years ago. Miraculously, they were still blooming with a vitality that contrasted the coldness he sometimes felt inside that massive mansion. He walked toward the house, but instead of going through the solid oak front door, his feet instinctively carried him down the side path leading to the back garden. He remembered his last call with Valeria just 6 hours ago, when she had described in a soft sing-song voice how they were enjoying an afternoon reading under the pergola. "Matteo is so happy, my love," she'd told him. "We're making so much progress with his reading. He's such a charming boy when you have patience." Those words had been exactly the balm Julian needed to soothe the guilt he always carried around in his luggage. The guilt of the absent father, of the widower trying to rebuild his life perhaps a little too fast. However, as he got closer to the wall of perfectly pruned hedges separating the service area from the main central garden, the birdsong was abruptly cut short. It wasn't laughter that broke the afternoon's harmony. It was a scream, a sharp, high-pitched sound filled with such hysteria and rage that it made the hair on the back of Julian's neck stand on end. He froze in his tracks, his heart hammering against his ribs. That tone of voice didn't match the image of domestic bliss he'd built up in his mind during the flight home. He moved forward cautiously, hidden by the foliage, until he had a clear line of sight into the center of the garden. What he saw made the leather briefcase in his right hand slip from his fingers, hitting the lawn silently, muffled by the thick grass. The scene looked like something straight out of a nightmare, and cruelly illuminated by the perfect golden light of the afternoon sun. There was Valeria, but she wasn't the poised, elegant woman he knew. She was wearing a tight, shimmering gold cocktail dress that reflected the sunlight with an almost painful intensity. Her dark hair, usually styled to immaculate perfection, was slightly messy from the violence of her movements. Her face, that face Julian had kissed and caressed, believing he saw kindness in it, was twisted into a grimace of disgust and pure rage. She had her fist raised, tense, threatening, hanging in the air like a sentence about to be executed. And the target of that fury wasn't an adult capable of defending themselves. It was Matteo. His 10-year-old son was sitting in his wheelchair, looking smaller and more fragile than Julian remembered. The boy had his head hung low, buried between his shoulders in a learned, defensive gesture, as if he were waiting for the blow, as if he were used to making himself invisible just to survive. Matteo wasn't screaming or crying. His suffering was silent, a resignation that hurt to watch more than any tears. His feet rested lifelessly on the footrests, and his small hands gripped the armrests until his knuckles turned white. But the hit never came. Standing between Valeria's golden fury and Matteo's helplessness was a figure Julian had taken for granted for years. Rosario, the housekeeper who had served in this home since before Matteo was born, stood there planted like a containment wall, with her black and white uniform pristine. Despite the heat and her gray hair in a severe bun, Rosario seemed to radiate a strength that completely contradicted her age and social status. Rosario's hand, worn rough by years of scrubbing floors and cooking banquets, was raised in a firm stop gesture, cutting right into Valeria's personal space. There was no submission in her stance, only protection and a fierce loyalty. The visual contrast was devastating. The young, wealthy woman, a symbol of beauty and success, transformed into a harpy by her own rage. And the humble older woman, a symbol of servitude, was elevated to the status of a sacred guardian. Julian felt the ground shift beneath his feet. A sudden wave of dizziness forced him to lean against the trunk of a nearby oak tree. Reality was fracturing right before his eyes. How was this even possible? How could the woman who swore eternal love to him over the phone be about to attack a disabled child? The cognitive dissonance was so intense. that Julian stood paralyzed, unable to breathe, turned into an invisible spectator to the tragedy unfolding in his own backyard. He couldn't move. His body refused to process the betrayal. Only his eyes and ears kept working, recording every painful detail so he would never ever forget it. From his position, hidden behind the ornamental hedges, Julian became a witness to a truth that had been masterfully concealed from him. His initial paralysis gave way to a painful auditory sharpness. Every word spoken in that garden reached his ears with crystal clarity, cutting through the hot afternoon air like sharp knives. "Get out of my way, you stupid old hag!" Valeria screamed, her voice distorted by rage, shedding every ounce of sophistication she usually displayed at gala dinners. "Who do you think you are touching me? This dress is worth more than you'll earn in your entire miserable life." Rosario didn't back down an inch. Even though Julian could see the slight tremor in the old woman's hands, her voice came out steady, charged with a dignity that Valeria's money could never buy. "I don't care how much your dress costs, ma'am," Rosario replied, and although she used the word ma'am, it sounded more like an accusation than a sign of respect. "I care that you're scaring the boy. I care that you raised your hand to him. You will not touch Master Mateo as long as I have breath in my body. He's just a child, for the love of God." Valeria let out a shrill laugh, a dry, humorless sound that made Julian's blood run cold. She took a step back, smoothing her dress with a twitchy motion, as if the mere contact with Rosario's morality had dirtied her. "A child," Valeria spat with disdain, pointing an accusing, perfectly manicured finger at Mateo. "That's not a child, Rosario. That is a burden. It's a genetic mistake that Julian refuses to ship off to a boarding school in Switzerland where it belongs so decent people don't have to watch him drool. Look at what he did to my shoes. He got dirt on me with the wheels of that chair because he's useless. He can't even move without getting in the way." Mateo shrank deeper into his wheelchair. Julian watched his son squeeze his eyes shut as a single lonely tear rolled down his pale cheek. Julian's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces in that instant. He remembered all the times Valeria had suggested specialized centers abroad, always claiming it would be best for his development. Now he understood her true motive. She didn't want what was best for Mateo. She wanted to wipe him off the map. She wanted a beautiful house free of problems, a perfect stage for her life of luxury where a kid in a wheelchair didn't clash with the decor. "The boy just wanted to show you the drawing he made for his dad," Rosario said, with her voice cracking with helplessness, bending down to pick up a crumpled piece of paper lying on the grass near the wheelchair's tires. "He got excited trying to get close. It was an accident." "I don't give a damn about his drawings or his accidents," Valeria interrupted, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "The wedding planners are coming today. Everything has to be perfect, and I don't want this nuisance rolling around with that pitiful look on his face, ruining my aesthetic. Lock him in the maid's quarters, Rosario, and don't let him out until I say so." "Ma'am, the maid's room doesn't have any ventilation. It's too hot today," Rosario pleaded, her tone shifting from defiance to begging. Not for herself, but for Mateo's well-being. "Then let him suffocate," Valeria screamed. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the birds seemed to fall silent in the face of such cruelty. Julian tasted metal in his mouth. He had bitten his lip until it bled without even realizing it. The woman he planned to marry in 2 months had just practically wished for his son's death. The blindfold that had covered his eyes for the past year was violently ripped away. He remembered the medical bills he paid every month, the exorbitant sums for physical and psychological therapies that Valeria was supposedly supervising. He looked at his son closely, a kind of attention that guilt and work had kept him from giving for months. From his hiding spot, he noticed details that distance and quick video calls had concealed. Mateo's t-shirt was faded and tight across the shoulders. His arms, which should have been getting stronger with therapy, looked thin, almost skeletal. The boy didn't look like someone receiving first-class care. He looked like a prisoner of war in his own home. "Listen to me closely, maid," Valeria continued, lowering her voice to a poisonous tone and getting right in Rosario's face. "When I marry Julian, and that's going to happen very soon because that idiot is eating out of the palm of my hand, you will be the first one out on the street. I'm going to fire you without a single penny of severance. I'll make sure no one in this city ever hires you. You're going to starve to death under a bridge, you insolent old woman. So if you want to keep a roof over your head for a few more months, you'd better get that kid out of my sight right now." Rosario swallowed hard, visibly terrified by the threat to her future. A woman her age without a job was doomed. But then, she did something that defined her character forever in Julian's eyes. She stood up straight, wiped away a stray tear, and positioned herself behind the wheelchair. "You can fire me when you're the mistress of the house, ma'am," Rosario said, her voice trembling but determined. "But as long as Mr. Julian is the owner of this house and as long as I have breath in my body, you will not yell at this child again. Come on, Mateo, let's go to the kitchen. I'll make you that hot chocolate you like." Valeria let out a huff of frustration and spun around. Turning her back on the house and the garden to look toward the main gate, probably waiting for her wedding planners fixing her hair as if nothing had happened, as if verbal abuse were just another household chore. It was in that moment, staring at the back of the woman who had deceived him and the hunched figure of his son being pushed by the only loyal person in that mansion, that Julian felt the paralysis leave his body. A cold, calculated, and devastating rage began to circulate through his veins, replacing the hot blood of shame. He was no longer the love-struck fiancé. He was no longer the absent businessman. In that moment, Julian Aragao remembered that he was a father and that there was a monster in his garden that needed to be expelled. He took the first step out from the hedges, stepping onto the grass with a firmness he hadn't felt in years. The crack of a twig under his shoe sounded like a gunshot in the tense silence of the garden. Valeria, still with her back turned, tensed up, perhaps thinking it was the gardener. But Julian did not stop. He advanced like a silent storm ready to unleash hell upon Valeria's fake paradise. The air in the garden felt dense, charged with static electricity that foreshadowed a storm, even though the sky above the mansion remained an insultingly clear blue. Rosario began to push the wheelchair, her gnarled hands clutching the black rubber grips with such force that her knuckles looked like white stones under her thin, age-spotted skin. The wheelchair's wheels crunched as they turned on the gravel of the side path, a harsh sound that seemed to protest against the injustice of the moment. Every meter she advanced away from Valeria felt like a Pyrrhic victory, a battle won in a war that Rosario knew she was slowly losing. "Don't look back, my child," Rosario whispered, leaning slightly toward Mateo's ear as she pushed. Her voice was a thread of tenderness woven with fear. "Don't listen to those ugly words, they are lies. You are a prince, the prince of this house. Your dad loves you and your mom watches over you from heaven." Mateo didn't reply verbally, but his small right hand lifted shakily to touch Rosario's hand on the chair handle. It was a minimal gesture, almost imperceptible, but charged with a desperate gratitude that made the old woman's eyes fill with tears. She blinked rapidly to clear them away. She couldn't afford to cry now. She had to be strong. She had to be the oak shield against which the poisoned darts of the future mistress would shatter. Behind her back, Valeria wasn't finished. The rich woman's indignation at being challenged by the help was a fuel that burned fiercely. She stood in the center of the garden with her hands on her hips, watching the retreat of the old woman and the boy with a mixture of triumph and repulsion. "And don't think I'm not going to check the pantry, Rosario," Valeria shouted, making sure her voice reached them. "I know you're sneaking him chocolates. You're fattening up the cripple with Julian's money. When I'm the owner, I'm going to put a padlock on the kitchen." Valeria ran her hand through her hair in frustration and then looked down at her gold dress. There was a small dark stain on the hem, barely visible where the rubber of the wheel had grazed the imported fabric. She let out a gasp more dramatic and heartfelt than any emotion she had shown toward the human being she had just humiliated. "Unbelievable," she exclaimed to herself, though loud enough for the universe to hear. "Ruined Italian silk. This is what I get for trying to be charitable and living in this house full of incompetent people." She pulled her mobile phone out of a small designer purse resting on a wrought iron garden table. Her fingers, with long nails painted a perfect crimson red, flew furiously across the screen. She dialed a number and brought the device to her ear, turning her back to the path, where Rosario and Mateo were disappearing, and positioning herself in profile to the hedges where Julian, invisible as a ghost, absorbed every second of this grotesque display. "Monica, yeah, it's me," Valeria said, changing her tone of voice instantly. The shrillness of her anger vanished, replaced by a tone of victimized suffering designed to generate sympathy. "You are not going to believe what just happened. I am on the verge of a nervous breakdown, girl. Julian's son. Yes, the special one. He just attacked me. Yeah, I swear to you. He rammed me with the wheelchair. He almost broke my leg. And the maid, that old witch Julian refuses to fire, she took his side. She screamed at me, Monica. She disrespected me in my own house." From his hiding place, Julian felt his blood boil in his temples. The lie flowed from Valeria's lips with chilling naturalness. There was no hesitation, no remorse. She was rewriting reality in real time, turning herself into the victim of a child who could barely lift his arms. "I don't know what I'm going to do," Valeria continued, pacing in circles, gesturing with her free hand. "Julian gets in late tonight or maybe tomorrow morning. You know how he is always working, always absent." He believes anything I tell him, thank God, because he feels guilty about leaving me alone with the package. I'm going to tell him the situation is unsustainable. Either he institutionalizes the boy in that place in Switzerland we saw in the brochure, or I don't know if I can go through with the wedding. I need peace, Monica. I deserve peace. And the money, well, Julian's money is good, but raising someone else's defective kids wasn't in the contract. The word contract echoed in the air like a final sentence. For Julian, it was the missing piece to complete the puzzle of his own stupidity. There was no love there, never was. He was a walking bank account, and his son was an annoying clause in a business contract that Valeria was eager to renegotiate. Rosario, who had stopped a few meters ahead to catch her breath, also heard part of the phone conversation. She turned slowly, her face pale. She knew her days in that house were numbered. She looked at Mateo, who was watching a yellow butterfly perched on a nearby flower, oblivious to the conspiracy to exile him. The old woman felt a pang in her chest, a physical pain caused by helplessness. "Oh God," Rosario whispered to the wind, a desperate prayer. "Open Mr. Julian's eyes, please. Take the blindfold off him before it's too late. If I leave, who will defend this angel? They are going to kill him with sadness, Lord. They are going to let him wither away like a plant without water." The contrast was brutal. The golden vanity of Valeria shining under the sun, worried about a stain on her silk and conspiring on the phone. And the gray dignity of Rosario standing in the shadow, praying not for herself, but for the child that society and his own stepmother had discarded. Julian closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. The scent of jasmine now mixed with the bitter aroma of betrayal. He remembered his first wife, Elena Mateo's mother. He remembered how she loved that garden, how she dreamed of seeing her son run through it. And now he had brought a viper to reign over Elena's sanctuary. The guilt transformed into a cold determination, hard as diamond. He opened his eyes. He had seen enough. It was time to end the play. Julian stepped out from the protection of the hedges. He didn't run. He didn't shout. His movement was deliberate, charged with an authority that didn't need volume to impose itself. His Italian leather shoes hit the stone path with a steady rhythm, clack, 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 cutting through Valeria's telephone monologue. "Yes, exactly. I'll tell him it was an accident." Valeria's voice cut off abruptly. The sound of someone else's footsteps made her spin on her heels. At first, her face showed annoyance, expecting to see some careless gardener, or perhaps Rosario returning to apologize. But when her eyes focused on the figure advancing toward her, the color fled from her face so fast it looked like her blood had been drained. There was Julian. Not the tired, smiling Julian she expected to greet with fake kisses the next day. This was a different Julian. He wore his impeccable suit, wrinkled from travel, his tie loosened, and the briefcase was missing from his hand. But the most terrifying thing was his eyes. They were two dark pits fixed on her, devoid of any warmth. He didn't blink. He walked toward her like a predator that has cornered its prey and is in no rush to deliver the final blow. The mobile phone slipped from Valeria's numb fingers. It hit the stone floor with a dry thud, and the screen shattered, Monica's voice asking, "Valeria, are you there?" sounding tiny and ridiculous from the ground. Valeria didn't bother picking it up. Her body went into a state of primal panic. "Julian," she stammered, her voice trembling violently. "My love, what? What a surprise you're here early." Her brain, trained in the art of deception, desperately tried to reboot. She forced a smile onto her lips, but it was a grotesque grimace. That didn't reach her eyes, which were bulging with terror. She tried to move toward him, opening her arms in a welcoming gesture that looked more like a plea for mercy. "I was so worried about you," she continued, speaking hurriedly, words tripping over each other. I was just talking to a friend about how hard the day has been. Mateo, the boy, had a crisis. Poor little angel. Rosario didn't know what to do, and I was trying to calm the situation." Julian didn't stop. He kept walking, closing the distance between them. The shadow his body cast fell over Valeria, covering her, snuffing out the shine of her gold dress. "Is that the patience you were telling me about on the phone, Valeria?" Julian asked. His voice wasn't a scream. It was a low, deep whisper, a vibration that resonated in Valeria's chest and made her instinctively recoil. "What? No, I don't know what you're talking about." Valeria stepped back, tripping over her own high heels. "Julian, my love, you're misunderstanding. You arrived at a bad time. Everything was out of control. That woman—" She pointed to where Rosario had gone, trying to deflect the blame like a cornered animal. "Rosario attacked me, she insulted me, I was just defending myself." Julian reached her position. Valeria braced herself for the impact, closing her eyes, expecting a scream, an argument, something she could work with, something she could manipulate with tears and sex later. But Julian didn't stop in front of her. He walked right past. He ignored her with the absolute indifference one ignores a piece of old furniture or a trash bag on the street. He didn't even look at her as he passed. The air displaced by his walk hit Valeria, leaving her frozen. With her arms open, hugging nothing frozen in her ridiculous welcoming posture. That silent rejection was more violent than any slap. It meant she no longer existed to him. Julian kept walking toward the gravel path toward where Rosario had stopped the wheelchair, paralyzed by the appearance of her boss. The old woman was trembling, clutching Mateo's shoulders, expecting to be fired, expecting the fury of the master who always believed his fiancé. Julian stopped in front of the wheelchair. His breathing accelerated. He saw the terror in Rosario's eyes and, even worse, the fear in his own son's eyes. Mateo was looking at him the way one looks at a dangerous stranger. Slowly, as if afraid of scaring a wounded bird, the great businessman, the man who moved millions with a signature, bent his knees. He knelt on the gravel, not caring that his tailored trousers got stained with dirt and dust. He was now at eye level with Mateo. "No, don't fire me, sir," sobbed Rosario, unable to hold back, stepping slightly between the father and son. "He didn't do anything. It was me." Julian raised a hand, not to silence her with authority, but in a gesture of peace, asking for calm. His eyes filled with tears, seeing up close the state of Mateo's clothes, the thinness of his neck, the infinite sadness in his gaze. "No one is going to fire you, Rosario," Julian said, his voice broken with emotion without looking away from his son. "No one is going to fire you except me, for having been so blind." He turned slightly back where Valeria was still standing, trembling, watching the scene in disbelief. Julian pointed a finger at her without getting up from the ground. "I give you 10 minutes, he said, and this time his voice had the edge of steel. 10 minutes to get your rags out of my room. If in 10 minutes you are still on my property, I will have you thrown out like an intruder." And Valeria paused, letting the silence weigh. "Don't even think about taking the ring. That ring was paid for with money that should have gone to my son. Leave it on the table." Valeria opened her mouth to protest, to scream, to launch one last lie, but Julian's look stopped her. It was a look of absolute disgust. The mask had fallen. The game was over. Julian turned his attention back to Mateo, reaching out a trembling hand to touch the boy's cheek. "Hey, champ," whispered Julian as a lonely tear rolled down his cheek. "Daddy's home, and this time Daddy is staying." Julian remained on his knees on the gravel, a posture of submission that no business partner or rival had ever witnessed in the Lion of the Ports. But standing there, fussed with the fragility of his own flesh and blood, the millionaire's arrogance crumbled, just like a sandcastle against the rising tide. His large, calloused hand still rested gently on Mateo's cheek. The boy didn't pull away, but he didn't lean into the touch either. He sat frozen, his eyes wide and glassy like a small animal caught in headlights waiting for the inevitable impact. That instinctive fear of his own father was the first dagger to pierce Julian's heart, but it wouldn't be the last, nor the most painful. With a gentleness that betrayed his massive size, Julian looked down, scanning his son's body with the focus of a coroner. He was looking for a cause of death. Only here he was searching for the cause of the miserable life unfolding right before his eyes. What he saw up close, without the filter of those pixelated video calls carefully staged by Valeria, hit him with a wave of nausea so intense he had to swallow hard just to keep from throwing up right then and there. "Rosario," Julian said without looking up, his voice sounding hollow like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "What is this?" His fingers grazed Mateo's t-shirt. It was cheap cotton, worn so thin at the elbows you could see through it with a stretched-out neck. It wasn't just old clothes, it was charity wear. Julian remembered approving a transfer of thousands of dollars last month specifically to renew Mateo's summer wardrobe, just as Valeria had asked. "Where are the clothes I paid for?" he asked, looking up at Rosario. The old woman wrung her hands, tears streaming down the deep lines of her face. "Sir, Miss Valeria said—" Rosario stopped, looking with terror at where his fiancé stood frozen. "She said you gave the order for austerity. She said the company was in trouble, that we had to cut costs. All the new clothes that arrived, she returned them or sold them online. Sir, she said Mateo didn't need them, that. After all, he doesn't leave the house, so no one sees him anyway." Julian felt a ringing in his ears. Austerity. His company had just had its most profitable year in a decade. He looked down at Mateo's feet. They were shoved into dirty canvas sneakers with no socks. When he gently moved the boy's foot, he noticed the shoe was tight. He was wearing shoes 2 sizes too small. The boy's toes were curled up inside the fabric, deforming it. And the chair? Julian touched the rusted metal of the armrest. I sent the money for that German electric wheelchair. The one with the soft touch controls for his hands. This thing is scrap metal from a public hospital. The madam said the electric wheelchair used too much electricity to charge. Rosario confessed, sobbing openly now, and that the boy would get lazy if he didn't use his arms. But Master Mateo doesn't have the strength, sir. His little arms. With a sudden movement, Julian rolled up Mateo's sleeve. What he saw took his breath away. The boy's arm was just bone wrapped in pale skin, zero muscle mass. But the worst part wasn't the thinness. It was the marks. Small yellowish bruises on his upper arm. The mark. The unmistakable imprint of fingers that had squeezed too hard, with too much impatience when lifting or moving him. "Who did this to him?" Julian roared. The sound was so terrifying that Mateo flinched. Julian softened his face, instantly gently stroking the hurt arm. "I'm sorry, son. I'm sorry." "It was me, sir. Sometimes, when I bathe him, he slips, and I—" Rosario started to lie, trying to shield the boy from a violent scene, taking the blame for something she didn't do. "You're lying." Julian cut her off, but not with anger toward her. He looked at Rosario's hands, worker's hands, rough but loving. Then he looked back at Valeria. Valeria was still standing there about 10 meters away. And then the realization hit Julian like a freight train. He looked at the golden dress she was wearing. It was an exclusive design, probably from that boutique in Milan she adored. He saw the watch on her wrist, a diamond-encrusted model that cost more than a sports car. He saw the sapphire earrings. The horrific math clicked in his mind in a split second. The German wheelchair was on Valeria's wrist. The physical therapy Mateo wasn't getting was hanging from her ears. The special food, the vitamins, the decent clothes. All of it had been transformed into the golden silk covering the body of the woman who claimed to love him. The therapy. Julian whispered slowly, standing up. His knees cracked, but he felt no pain. He only felt a glacial cold in his chest. "Rosario, look me in the eye. When was the last time the physical therapist came?" Rosario closed her eyes, unable to keep up the lie any longer. "It was 4 months ago, sir. Dr. Martinez came to the door, but Miss Valeria, she told him not to come back. She told him you had decided to stop the treatment because the boy was a hopeless case and that it was just throwing money down the drain. 4 months, sir." Julian felt the world spinning around him. 4 months of fake reports on WhatsApp. 4 months of old photos sent as if they were new. 4 months believing his son was getting better, when in reality he was wasting away in a rusty chair. Julian turned completely toward Valeria. He didn't see a woman anymore. He saw a parasite, a malignant tumor that had fed on his son's health just so she could shine in society. Valeria's beauty, which had once captivated him, now looked grotesque to him, like a porcelain mask painted over rotting flesh. "Julian, please let me explain." Valeria started taking a step forward. She tried to force her seductive smile back into place even though terror was making her lips tremble. "Rosario is senile, my love. You know how people get at that age. They make things up, they get dates mixed up. The therapist came last week. I swear to you." "Shut up." Julian's voice boomed against the mansion walls. It wasn't a hysterical scream. It was a military order. "Don't you dare insult my intelligence one more time. Don't you dare open that poison-filled mouth to speak my son's name or talk about this woman who is worth 1,000 times more than you." Valeria stopped dead in her tracks, crashing against the invisible wall of Julian's fury. The reality of the situation was starting to seep into her narcissistic mind. There was no way out. No lie elaborate enough to cover up the physical evidence of a malnourished child and a terrified employee. But her survival instinct, fueled by greed, pushed her to try one last desperate play. "I did it all for us," she screamed, switching tactics from denial to justification. "We were spending a fortune on a lost cause." Julian looked at him. "He's never going to walk. We needed that money for the wedding, for the summer house, for our future children. Healthy children that I'm going to give you." The confession, tossed out like a sales pitch, hung in the stale air of the garden. Valeria had just signed her own death warrant, admitting she'd sacrificed his living son for the promise of hypothetical ones, trading Mateo's life for empty luxuries. Julian felt a sudden, terrifying calm. There were no more doubts, no more moral conflicts. All that remained was the execution of justice. The silence that followed Valeria's justification was absolute. Even Rosario stopped sobbing, holding her breath at the sheer monstrosity of what she had just heard. Mateo, in his chair, hung his head even lower as if he wanted to disappear into his own chest, ashamed of being the burden standing in the way of his father's happiness. Julian walked toward Valeria. Every step was heavy, deliberate. She tried to keep her composure, lifting her chin in a defiant gesture she'd rehearsed 1,000 times in the mirror. But her eyes betrayed her, frantically searching for a way out. "Healthy children," Julian repeated when he was just a yard away from her. His voice was so cold it seemed to scrape the air. "You are not going to be the mother of my children, Valeria. You're not going to be a mother to anyone, because you need a soul to raise a life. And you're empty. But I'm your fiancé," she whispered, touching the diamond ring on her finger as if the object had magical protective powers. "We have an engagement. The press? The invitations have already been sent out. The engagement was over the moment you decided my son's life was worth less than that dress you're wearing." Julian held out his hand, palm open, demanding the ring. Valeria immediately covered her hand with the other, backing away. "No, it's mine. You gave it to me. It's a gift." "It wasn't a gift. It was a down payment on a life you pretended to live." Julian didn't wait. With a quick movement, he snatched the designer bag she'd dropped on a nearby chair when the argument started. He zipped it open and dumped the contents onto the grass makeup keys to the sports car he'd bought her and the unlimited black card. "All of this stays here. Everything." "You're robbing me!" Valeria screeched, completely losing her composure as she lunged to grab the car keys. "That car's in my name. Check the papers, Valeria," Julian said with a sad, cynical smile. "Everything is under the company's name. The company I run, and you've just been fired for just cause." Julian pulled his own phone from his pocket and speed-dialed a number. "Ramirez, get to the back garden. And bring 2 men with you." Valeria went even paler when she heard the head of security's name. Ramirez was ex-military, and he'd never been able to stomach Valeria's arrogance. She had always treated him like a dog, complaining about his uniform or the way he spoke. She knew she wouldn't find any allies there. "You can't do this to me." She started crying, but this time, they were tears of rage, not sadness. "What are people gonna say? I'm a public figure in this town. I'm gonna destroy you, Julian. I'll tell everyone you hit me. I'll say you're a monster." Julian crossed his arms, completely unmoved. "Go ahead, and I'll show the security footage I installed 6 months ago in the garden and living room. The cameras you never noticed because you were too busy looking at yourself in the mirror." Valeria's eyes went wide with shock. She looked instinctively toward the corners of the terrace roof, toward the garden lights. There, discreetly hidden, the black lenses stood as silent witnesses to her downfall. You were spying on me," she stammered. "I was protecting you," Julian corrected. "I put them in for security, because of the kidnappings. I never thought I'd capture the kidnapper inside my own house. I have footage of everything, Valeria. Your screaming, your neglect, how you took the plate of food away from Mateo so he wouldn't get fat. If you open your mouth to tell a single lie about me, I will publish every second of those videos. And believe me, the high society you adore so much will eat you alive." At that moment, the sound of heavy boots running on stone announced the arrival of the cavalry. Ramirez and 2 burly guards appeared from the side of the house, their faces serious and alert. Seeing the scene, Valeria a mess, Julian furious, and the boy in the chair, Ramirez understood the situation in a split second. He had been waiting for this day. "Mr. Aragao," Ramirez said, standing at attention. "What is the emergency?" "There is no emergency, Ramirez," Julian said, pointing at Valeria with a gesture of pure contempt. "Just trash that needs to be taken out. Miss Valeria is no longer welcome on this property. Escort her to the exit. She is not allowed inside the house for any reason. We'll send her personal belongings in boxes tomorrow." "Let go of me!" Valeria screamed as one of the guards grabbed her arm gently but firmly. "I am the lady of this house, Ramirez. Tell this idiot to let go of me." Ramirez smiled a small, satisfied smile he had been saving for a year. "I'm sorry, miss. My orders come from the owner, and you're just an unwelcome guest now." Valeria resisted, digging her heels into the grass, turning her exit into a pathetic spectacle. Julian, please," she begged, changing strategy again when she saw that force wasn't working. "I love you. We can fix this. Forgive me. I was just stressed. I'll do whatever you want. I'll take care of Mateo." Julian turned his back on her. It was the final gesture. He walked over to Rosario and Mateo, putting his body between them and the woman's screams. "Get her out of here," Julian ordered without looking back. The guards dragged Valeria, shouting insults and curses toward the side gate. The commotion would surely alert the neighbors, but Julian didn't care. In fact, he preferred that they see it, that everyone see how the corruption was being expelled from his home. When the screams faded and the metallic clang of the service gate finally shut, a deep silence descended over the garden. It was a different silence than before. It wasn't tense or fearful. It was the silence of a battlefield when the cannons finally stop roaring. Julian exhaled a breath he seemed to have been holding for years. His shoulders relaxed. He turned toward Mateo and Rosario. The old woman stared at him in awe as if she were seeing a divine apparition. Mateo, however, was still trembling, his eyes fixed on the spot where Valeria had disappeared, waiting for the monster to return. Julian knelt down in front of his son again. This time, Mateo didn't flinch as much. "She's gone, son," Julian said softly, taking Mateo's cold hands in his warm ones. "She's gone forever. No one is ever going to hurt you again. I promise you, on your mom's memory." Mateo looked up slowly, locking eyes with his father. In that gaze, Julian saw the long road ahead of them, the trauma, the mistrust, the physical pain, but he also saw a spark, a small, fragile spark of hope. And to Julian, that was worth more than his entire fleet of ships, more than all the gold in the world, more than any empty promise of romantic love. He had reclaimed his most important title, Dad, and this time he wasn't planning on giving it up. The metallic echo of the service gate closing behind Valeria seemed to resonate endlessly in the garden, marking the end of an era of terror and the beginning of an overwhelming silence. Julian remained motionless, his knees still pressed into the gravel, feeling the adrenaline of the confrontation evaporate, leaving a dead, suffocating weight in his chest in its place. Guilt slowly stood up. His legs trembled not from physical effort but from the emotional impact of the reality he had just discovered. He dusted off his suit pants, automatically a reflex from his old life of impeccable appearance, but he stopped halfway, realizing how ridiculous it was to worry about his clothes when his son's soul was in tatters. "Let's go inside," Julian said, his voice rough and low. He tried to grab the handles of the wheelchair, but Rosario, out of instinct, didn't let go. There was a brief moment of tension, a split second where the maid and the boss shared control of the vessel holding Mateo's life. Rosario looked at him with teary, wary eyes, like a lioness hesitating to hand over her cub even to his own father, because that father had been a ghost for way too long. "Let me, Rosario," he asked. "Julian," not as an order but asking for permission. "I need to do this." Rosario nodded slowly and pulled back her calloused hands. Julian took hold of the chair. As he pushed, he felt the wheels resist, hearing the faint squeak of a rusted axle. Every vibration from the chair shot up his arms and stabbed right into his conscience. How had he not noticed before? How had he let his son get around in this piece of junk while he was flying in private jets? They entered the mansion through the kitchen door, avoiding the grand main entrance that Valeria loved so much. The air conditioning hit their faces, an artificial chill that clashed with the human warmth missing from within those walls. The kitchen was spotless, too clean, sterile. No smell of home-cooked food, just the scent of chemical lemon cleaners. "Where does he sleep?" Julian asked, stopping the chair in the hallway. Rosario looked down, ashamed of a decision that wasn't hers to make. "In the guest room downstairs, sir." Mrs. Valeria said carrying the boy up and down the stairs was unsanitary for the second-floor carpets, and that the elevator was too loud at night. Julian clenched his jaw until it ached. He turned the chairs toward the service corridor, toward the cramped room that used to be for the on-call driver. He opened the door and the smell of stale air hit him. The room was tiny and dark. The heavy curtains were drawn, blocking out every ray of sunlight. No toys in sight, no books, no colors. Just a narrow hospital bed, a nightstand with a glass of warm water, and an old wardrobe. The walls were bare. It looked like a minimum security prison cell, not the bedroom of the heir to a shipping empire. Julian flipped the switch. A bare bulb on the ceiling lit up the desolate room. He wheeled Mateo to the center of the room and crouched in front of him again. Mateo tried to form words, attempting a smile, but his lips were trembling. "Do you like this room?" Mateo didn't answer. He just stared at his hands clasped in his lap, his fingers moving rhythmically, a nervous tick Julian didn't recognize. The boy's silence was a wall higher than the ones surrounding the mansion. Julian, desperate for a connection, for immediate forgiveness to ease his conscience, reached out to hug his son. It was an impulsive move born out of love and regret, but Mateo reacted with pure terror. Seeing his father's large arms coming at him, the boy recoiled violently, letting out a choked whimper and covering his head with his arms to shield himself from an imaginary blow. The sudden movement made the wheelchair rock dangerously. Julian froze. His arms hung in the air, empty. His son's physical rejection felt like a bullet to the heart. Mateo didn't see a hug. He saw a threat. He saw the figure of a large man like the repairman who sometimes came by and looked at him with pity or disgust. Or worse, he saw the shadow of the authority that allowed Valeria's abuse. Rosario rushed forward, gently stepping between them. "Easy, sir. Easy," she whispered, stroking Mateo's hair to calm him down. "He's not used to being touched except by me. The missus, she wouldn't let anyone touch him. She said that diseases spread." Julian slumped to the floor, his dignity forgotten. He buried his face in his hands. A dry, painful sob escaped his throat. "My God, what have I done?" he murmured into his palms. "I thought I was working for him. I thought money could fix everything. But I left him all alone in hell." The sound of his father weeping made Mateo slowly lower his arms. He watched the powerful man collapsed on the floor of his tiny room. There was confusion in the boy's eyes. Monsters don't cry, Mateo thought. Valeria never cried, she only screamed. But this man was crying. Julian roughly wiped his tears and pulled his phone from his pocket. His fingers, trembling just minutes ago, now moved with fierce determination. He dialed his personal secretary, an efficient woman who managed his life down to the minute. "Mr. Aragao," the professional voice on the other end answered, "I need you to confirm the welcome dinner for tomorrow." "Cancel everything," Julian said. His voice was cold steel. "Cancel the dinner. Cancel next week's meetings. Cancel the trip to Tokyo next month." "But, sir, the contract with the Japanese, there are millions at stake." "I don't give a damn about the contract," Julian shouted, startling Rosario. "Listen to me closely, Anna. I am out, indefinitely. Hand over operational command to the vice president. If the company sinks, then let it sink. My only priority right now is in this house. I want you to contact the best specialist in pediatrics and rehabilitation in the country. I don't care how much it costs to get him here. I want him in my living room tomorrow, first thing in the morning. And, Anna, contact my lawyers. I want a restraining order against Valeria and a complete audit of my personal accounts from the last year. I want to know about every last cent that woman stole." He hung up the phone and tossed it onto the hospital bed. The device bounced off the thin mattress. He turned back to Mateo, who was watching him with wide eyes. "No more trips, Mateo," Julian said, a solemn promise in his gaze. "No more meetings. Starting today, my only job is you, and I'm going to work harder than I've ever worked in my life to make you smile again, even if it takes the rest of my days." The transformation of the Aragao mansion didn't begin with grand architectural renovations or buying new furniture, though that would come later. It began that very afternoon with the purge of the complicit staff and the restructuring of the house's moral hierarchy. Julian gathered the 3 remaining employees in the kitchen, the cook, a young maid, and the gardener. Rosario was by his side, not as their equal, but seated in a chair while the others remained standing. "I want to know," Julian said, pacing in front of them with his hands behind his back, "which one of you knew that my son wasn't eating the food I paid for, who knew he wasn't getting his therapy sessions? Who heard the screams and didn't call me?" The silence was thick. The cook, a robust man Julian had hired for his French cuisine credentials, looked at the floor. "Sir, Miss Valeria threatened us. She said you gave her total authority. We were afraid of losing our jobs." Afraid of losing their jobs. Julian nodded slowly, digesting the cowardice. "My son was afraid of losing his life. You're all fired, all 3 of you. You have 1 hour to pack your things, and be grateful I don't press charges for criminal negligence. I never want to see you again." When the employees walked out with their heads hung low, the kitchen felt huge and empty. Only Julian and Rosario remained. "And who's going to cook now, sir?" Rosario asked, worried. "Not you, that I can assure you," Julian replied. "You've been the maid, the nurse, the mother, and the shield for far too long. Starting today, Rosario, you are the house manager of this mansion. You are in charge. We will hire new staff people you approve, people who understand that in this house Mateo is king. Your salary triples starting this month, and I want you to rest." "I can't rest, sir," Rosario said with a sad smile. "Someone has to bathe the boy. It's late, and he needs his routine. He gets nervous if he doesn't bathe by 7 o'clock. Julian checked his watch. It was 6:30. He took off his suit jacket and draped it over the back of a chair. He unfastened his gold cufflinks and began rolling up his white silk sleeves to his elbows. "Teach me," Julian said. "Sir, teach me how to bathe him. He's my son. I've changed my nephew's diapers, but that was a long time ago and never with his condition. I need to learn, Rosario. I don't want to be a father who just signs checks." I want to be a father who cares." They went to the accessible bathroom on the ground floor. The experience was a brutal lesson in humility for the millionaire. Julian, used to controlling empires, felt clumsy and useless in the face of Mateo's fragility. Rosario filled the bathtub, checking the temperature with her elbow. "Not too hot, not too cold, sir. His skin is very sensitive," she instructed. The moment came to undress Mateo. The boy was rigid, his eyes fixed on Julian with mistrust. Julian felt a lump in his throat as he had to peel off the dirty clothes. Every layer he removed revealed the magnitude of the abandonment even more. Ribs sticking out skin pale from lack of sun, and the beginning of bed sores on his back from lying in the same position for too long. Julian had to bite the inside of his cheek to keep from crying again. He couldn't cry. Mateo needed stability, not pity. "Come on, champ, let's get in the water," Julian said, trying to make his voice sound cheerful. He tried to lift him by the armpits like he remembered doing when Mateo was a baby. "No, no," Rosario exclaimed, quickly stopping him. "That hurts his shoulders, sir. You have to put one arm under his knees and the other behind his back, like you're carrying a bride across the threshold. Like this." Julian corrected his posture and lifted Mateo. The boy weighed alarmingly little. He felt as light as a feather, yet he was a burden that weighed tons on Julian's conscience. As soon as he felt the warm water, Mateo sighed. His tense body relaxed just a little. Julian picked up the sponge. His large hands, used to signing documents and holding glasses of whiskey, moved with nervous clumsiness. "Gentler, sir, like you're washing a ripe peach?" Rosario corrected him, guiding Julian's hand with her own. It was a moment of sacred intimacy, a father washing his son's feet. Julian gently washed the feet deformed from lack of use, the thin ankles. Then he moved up to the legs, the bony knees. As he ran the sponge over Mateo's chest, the boy looked up and for the first time held Julian's gaze for more than 2 seconds. There wasn't a smile yet, but there was curiosity. Mateo was trying to understand that this man, the Lord of Plains, was right there getting his designer shirt soaking wet, kneeling on the hard tiles just to wash his back. "Sorry about the soap in your eyes," Julian murmured when a bit of foam landed near Mateo's face. Julian rushed to wipe it away with his own sleeve, not caring about the fabric. After the bath came the challenge of getting him dressed. Julian realized there weren't any clean, decent pajamas. Everything was worn out. "Put one of your t-shirts on him, sir," Rosario suggested. "It'll be like a nightgown on him, but it'll be clean and it smells like, well, it smells like Dad." Julian ran to his suitcase, which was still in the entryway, and pulled out a soft, brand-new Egyptian cotton t-shirt. He came back and put it on Mateo. The boy was swimming in the fabric, but he looked comfortable. He looked dignified. That night, Julian didn't eat. He sat Mateo in the kitchen and, following Rosario's instructions, made a simple mash, the only thing he dared to cook without burning the house down. He sat across from him and picked up the spoon. "Open up, Mateo." "The airplane is coming in for a landing," Julian said, feeling ridiculous yet more real than he ever had before. Mateo didn't open his mouth at first. He looked at the spoon, then at Rosario, and finally at Julian. Slowly, shyly, he parted his lips. Julian fed him. Every spoonful was a small victory, another brick rebuilt in the collapsed bridge between them. When they finished, Julian carried Mateo back toward the dark room, but he stopped at the door. "No," Julian said. "You're not going back in there." "But sir, his bed is there," Rosario said. "He's sleeping with me," Julian declared. "In the master bedroom in the big bed, and tomorrow that servant's room becomes storage. Mateo will never sleep in a cell again." He carried Mateo upstairs in his arms, ignoring the pain in his back, ignoring the exhaustion from his trip. He laid him down in the center of the massive king-size bed amidst silk sheets and feather pillows. Mateo looked like a tiny castaway in a white ocean. Julian lay down beside him on top of the covers, still fully dressed. He turned off the main light, leaving only a dim lamp on. "Rest now, son," Julian whispered in the semi-darkness. Mateo didn't answer, but his breathing slowly calmed down. Julian stayed awake, watching over his son's sleep like a guardian who failed once and swore to never fail again. And in that darkness, Julian Aragao began to plan his true revenge against fate, that boy's happiness. The sky over the city had turned deep purple, almost black, threatening to unleash a fury built up over days of stifling heat. It was 3 a.m. when the storm finally broke. It wasn't a timid rain. It was a biblical deluge accompanied by thunder that shook the foundations of the Aragao mansion as if they were made of paper. Julian was sleeping in a leather wingback chair he'd dragged to the foot of the king-size bed where Mateo was resting. He had refused to leave the boy alone even after Rosario assured him she could take turns watching him. The habit of watching him sleep had become his new obsession, replacing his compulsive checking of the Asian stock markets. A flash of lightning lit up the room with a ghostly white light, followed almost instantly by a deafening crack of thunder that seemed to split the sky in two right above the roof. Julian jolted awake, heart racing, disoriented for a split second. Then, he heard it. Or, rather, he heard the absence of sound, which is more terrifying than any scream. From the vastness of the bed came a rhythmic sound, a dry, repetitive thud, thump, 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 and a ragged, wheezing breath on the verge of hyperventilation. Julian scrambled to his feet, clumsily tripping over the rug in the darkness. Another lightning bolt flashed across the window and revealed the scene. Mateo was sitting in the middle of the bed with his knees pulled tight to his chest, rocking violently back and forth. His hands were gripping his own arm so hard he was hurting himself, digging his nails into skin that was already scarred. His eyes were bulging, fixed on nothing, seeing horrors that weren't there. "Son!" Julian lunged toward the bed. Feeling the weight of his father on the mattress, Mateo let out a silent scream. No voice left his throat, only terrified air. He tried to crawl backward to the headboard, kicking weakly with his atrophied legs to push the threat away. To Mateo, in the middle of his post-traumatic crisis, the thunder was the sound of Valeria slamming doors, and the large figure approaching was the prelude to punishment for being a nuisance. No, it's not her, it's Dad." Julian raised his hands, showing empty palms. "Mateo, look at me. It's Dad. No one is going to hurt you." But Mateo's panic was blind. The boy started banging his head against the padded headboard, seeking physical pain to escape the mental terror. Julian felt a wave of helplessness he had never experienced in any corporate crisis. He knew how to negotiate with strikers, how to calm furious investors, but he didn't know how to pull his son out of that dark abyss. "Rosario!" Julian shouted, his voice cracking with desperation, forgetting the woman was sleeping in the service wing on the other side of the house. Mateo kept hitting himself. Thump, thump. Julian acted on pure instinct, climbed onto the bed and wrapped his body around Mateo. It wasn't a soft hug, it was firm containment. He trapped the boy's arm so he would stop scratching himself and placed his large hand between Mateo's head and the headboard to cushion the blows. "Let it out. It's over. Let it out," Julian whispered in his son's ear, feeling the small body vibrating like an overheated engine. "I'm here. I'm right here." Mateo fought. He fought with surprising strength for his fragility, driven by the adrenaline of fear. He bit Julian's forearm. Julian felt the teeth sinking into his flesh. The pain was sharp, but he didn't pull away. He didn't make a single sound of complaint. He accepted the pain as a necessary penance, as if by bleeding he could purge his son's pain. "Cry, Mateo, scream, if you want, but I'm not letting you go," Julian said, tightening his hold. The rain beat violently against the glass, creating a curtain of noise that isolated them from the outside world. Little by little, Mateo's physical struggle began to give way, not from calm, but from exhaustion. His breathing was still an agonizing wheeze. Julian, desperately looking for something, anything to calm him, rummaged through the dusty archives of his memory. He remembered the nights 10 years ago when Elena was alive. He remembered how she soothed Mateo when he was a baby and had colic. There was a melody, a simple song, an ancient lullaby that Elena's grandmother had taught her. Julian began to hum. His voice was deep out of tune and trembling from his own held-back tears. "Sleep, my boy, the sun is fading away. The silver stars are coming to find you," he sang softly, the sound vibrating against Mateo's back. He repeated the verse over and over, turning it into a mantra against the darkness. "If you are scared, the moon will come and cradle you in her arm." He felt a shift. Mateo's body stopped being stiff as a board. The wheezing breath turned into deep, wet sobs. Mateo stopped trying to escape and for the first time rested his head on Julian's chest. "I am so sorry, son," Julian wept, letting his tears fall onto Mateo's sweaty hair. "I'm sorry I wasn't there when there was thunder before. I'm sorry I didn't protect you from the monsters. I'm such a fool, but I swear to God you will never have to face fear alone again." They stayed like that for hours. The storm outside subsided into a gentle rain, but the storm inside the room had been tamed by something stronger than fear, the unwavering presence of a father. When Rosario entered silently at 6 in the morning with a tray of tea, she found an image that took her breath away. Julian was sitting on the bed, leaning against the headboard, his shirt wrinkled and a dried bloodstain on his forearm where Matteo had bitten him. Matteo was sleeping deeply in his arms, his face hidden in his father's neck, his small hand clutching Julian's shirt lapel like a lifeline. Julian raised his eyes toward Rosario and brought a finger to his lips, asking for absolute silence. His eyes were red and swollen, but they shone with fierce determination. That night, the businessman had definitely died. The father was born. The calendar in the kitchen marked a date circled in red drawn by Julian's trembling hand. August 24th. Matteo's 11th birthday. The Araga mansion had changed in the last 3 weeks. It no longer looked like a cold, sterile museum. Now, there were polished wooden ramps professionally installed over every step. There were brightly colored therapeutic toys in the living room, defying the minimalist decor. The heavy curtains were thrown wide open, letting in a golden light that bathed the floors. But the biggest change was in the air. You could breathe in the peace. Julian was in the dining room, nervously adjusting a blue tablecloth. He had strictly forbidden hiring an events company. "I don't want strangers," he had said. "I don't want fake people smiling out of obligation." So there he was, one of the richest men in the country, blowing up yellow balloons with his own lungs until he got dizzy. Rosario watched him from the doorway with a smile that crinkled her eyes. "Sir, that balloon is going to pop if you keep blowing," she warned affectionately. "It has to be perfect, Rosario," Julian said, tying the knot on the balloon with clumsy fingers. "It's the first real birthday we've spent together in years. Where is he?" "The new nurse Carlos is getting him dressed. We bought him that linen shirt he liked. He looks very handsome." Julian nodded, smoothing his own clothes. He was more nervous than the day he went public in New York. What if Matteo didn't like it? What if the trauma was still too strong to let him enjoy himself? The sound of the electric wheelchair, the new one, the German one with touch-sensitive controls that Matteo was learning to use with surprising speed, announced his arrival. Matteo entered the dining room. The physical change was evident, though slow. His cheeks were no longer sunken. They had a faint pink color thanks to proper nutrition and the sun he took in the garden every morning with his father. His eyes, although they still held a shadow of melancholy, no longer looked at the floor constantly. They scanned the surroundings with curiosity. Upon seeing the balloons and the small homemade cake, a messy chocolate disaster that Julian and Rosario had baked together, which ended up a bit lopsided, Matteo's eyes widened a little more. "Happy birthday, champ," Julian said with a soft voice, approaching but respecting the personal space Matteo still needed. Matteo looked at the cake. There were 11 candles. He looked at Julian. There was an expectant silence. Matteo didn't smile openly. His face still held that rigidity learned to hide emotions from Valeria, but his shoulders relaxed. "Sit here at the head of the table." Julian moved a chair to make room for the wheelchair. "Rosario, can you bring the gift?" Rosario approached with a flat box wrapped in bright blue paper. Julian took it and placed it in front of Matteo on the table. "I know you like video games," Julian started to say, sitting next to his son. "And I bought you the new console. It's in the living room, but this is the important gift." Matteo looked at the box, lifted a hand, and with slow and somewhat uncoordinated movements began to tear the paper. Underneath was a large book bound in brown leather with the letters Matteo and his story engraved in gold on the cover. It was a photo album, but not just any album. Julian opened it to the first page. "Look," Julian pointed. "This is your mom. She was pregnant with you here. Look at that smile she had. She always touched her belly and talked to you. She said you were going to be a soccer player or a scientist, whatever you wanted." Matteo touched the photo with his fingertip, fascinated. Valeria had hidden or burned almost all of Elena's photos, claiming they were depressing. Matteo barely remembered his mother's face. Julian turned the page. "And here I am with you at the hospital the day you were born." The photo showed a Julian, 10 years younger, looking at the baby with adoration. "Look at the silly look on my face. I was so happy, Matteo. I loved you from the very first second." Julian swallowed hard, fighting the lump in his throat. "I lost my way, son. When Mom died, it hurt so much that I hid in my work. I thought if I worked hard and gave you money, that was love. But I was wrong. Love is being here. It's this." He turned the pages. There were photos recovered from old phones. Blurry photos of Matteo's first steps before the accident, photos that Rosario had secretly kept in a shoebox under her bed so Valeria wouldn't find them. "And these last pages?" Julian pointed to the blank sheets at the end of the album. "These are empty. You know why." Matteo looked up from the album and looked into his father's eyes. He shook his head slightly. Because we're going to fill them, Julian said with tears sliding down his cheeks. Starting today. Tomorrow, we'll take a photo at breakfast and another at your therapy and another when we go to the park. We're going to fill this book with happy memories, Mateo. I promise you, I'm not going anywhere. The emotion in the room was dense, palpable. Rosario was drying her eyes with the corner of her apron. The wall clock went tick-tock, marking the seconds of a moment that would define the rest of their lives. Mateo looked at his father, looked at the brutal sincerity in the eyes of that man who had gone from being a feared stranger to his nighttime caregiver, his clumsy cook, his protector. Something broke inside the boy. The wall of ice he'd built to shield his heart from the pain of neglect cracked. His lips moved. They were dry. He hadn't spoken in 6 months. Not since Valeria screamed that his voice was annoying. Julian leaned in close, thinking the boy wanted water. Duh. Dad. It was barely a whisper, a raspy, rusty sound. Julian froze. The world stopped. Rosario let out a stifled gasp. Mateo took a breath, a visible effort, and tried again this time, staring straight at Julian with an intensity that pierced his soul. Dad, he said, his voice a bit clearer, now younger and sweeter, you stayed. And he didn't say thanks for the gift, he didn't say happy birthday. He spoke the only truth that mattered, validating his deepest fear and his greatest hope. Julian felt as if his heart had been ripped out and put back in, but this time beating the right way. The lion of the ports, the man of iron, crumbled. He hid his face in his hands and wept. Not tears of sadness, but tears of pure cathartic relief, a flood of released emotions. He felt a small, warm hand touch his head, clumsily stroking his gray hair. Don't cry, Dad, Mateo whispered, repeating the words Julian had told him during the storm. I'm here. Julian lifted his head, took his son's hand, and kissed it twice 1,000 times. Yes, son, yes, we're both here, and no one is ever going to separate us. Rosario, watching the scene, knew her job as a guardian was over, and her job as a grandmother had just begun. She quietly stepped out into the garden to give them privacy, looking up at the blue sky and whispering, We did it, Miss Elena. We did it. The peace in the Aragon mansion, though sweet, was briefly interrupted 1 week after Mateo's birthday. The reality of the outside world, that world of cold laws and reputations Julian knew so well, came knocking in the form of a manila envelope delivered by a motorcycle courier. Julian was in the garden helping Mateo transplant some petunias into a raised planter they had built together. His hands were covered in rich black soil, far from the image of the immaculate tycoon of the past. Rosario took the envelope and brought it to him with a worried look. Sir, it's from the law firm Lopez Añas Associates. It's the most aggressive firm in the city for defamation and divorce cases. Julian wiped his hands on an old rag hanging from his belt. He didn't seem surprised. He knew the nature of the beast he had faced. Valeria wouldn't just fade silently into the night. Her ego was too big to accept defeat without trying to bite one last time. He opened the envelope. It was a lawsuit, breach of promise to marry, moral and psychological damages, public defamation. The figure she demanded as compensation had so many zeros that Rosario had to read it twice to believe it. Valeria didn't just want money. She wanted half of Julian's fortune, arguing that she had been the emotional architect of his recent success and had sacrificed her best years caring for his son. She's got guts, I'll give her that, Julian murmured with a calmness that made the blood run cold. There was no fear in his voice, only the disdain of someone watching an insect try to stop a tank. What are you going to do, sir? Rosario asked, afraid that the law might be on the side of the liars, as it so often is. I'm going to end this today. Julian didn't call his lawyers. He didn't want to turn this into a media circus that would drag on for years. He called the personal number of Valeria's lead attorney, directly a man named Victor Lopez, known for being a shark with no scruples. Mr. Lopez, Julian said when they answered, his voice ringing out through the phone's speaker while Mateo watched him from his chair. I'm inviting you to come to my house this afternoon at 4. Bring your client. My client has nothing to discuss with you, Mr. Aragon, unless it is to discuss the terms of the financial settlement, the lawyer replied arrogantly. Come over, or I send what I have to the press at 5. You have 1 hour. At 4 o'clock sharp, a black car pulled up in front of the gate. Valeria stepped out dressed in severe black with dark glasses and the attitude of a grieving widow, perfectly designed for the paparazzi cameras that fortunately weren't there. She walked into the mansion's library, followed by her lawyer, a short, nervous man shuffling through documents in his briefcase. Julian was waiting for them, standing up. He didn't offer them a seat. He didn't offer them water. My client has suffered incalculable public humiliation, the lawyer began to recite. Shut up, Julian said. He didn't yell, he simply ordered it with such authority that the lawyer snapped his mouth shut. Julian grabbed a remote control from the mahogany table and pointed it at the massive TV screen that dominated the library wall. Before we talk money, I want you to watch a movie. The screen flickered to life. It was security footage. The date in the bottom right corner marked 3 months ago. The high-definition image with clear audio showed the living room. Valeria appeared sitting on the sofa, talking on the phone and laughing. Matteo was on the floor trying to reach a glass of water sitting on the coffee table. He couldn't reach it. He was whimpering from thirst. Valeria looked at him, covered the phone's mouthpiece, and gave his hand a soft but contemptuous kick to shove him away. Stop bothering me, you burden. If you're thirsty, crawl to the kitchen. Valeria's voice rang out in the recording, crisp and cruel. In the library, the real Valeria went pale beneath her makeup. Julian switched the video. Another date. The garden. Valeria eating an ice cream in front of Matteo under the scorching sun while the boy cried silently with parched lips. This is for normal people, Matteo. Broken people don't eat ice cream, said the Valeria on the screen. Julian paused the image. The silence in the library was deathly. Lawyer Lopez had stopped reviewing his papers. He stared at the screen with wide eyes, then looked at his client with a mix of horror and professional calculation. He knew that video wouldn't just destroy the case, it would destroy his career if he were associated with the defense of such a monstrosity. I have 200 hours of footage, Julian said, setting the remote down on the table. Physical abuse, psychological abuse, criminal negligence, embezzlement of funds meant for a minor's health. He approached Valeria, who was visibly trembling, having lost her entire victim facade. You asked for 20 million in moral damages, Julian said, leaning in toward her. I'm offering you a different deal. You withdraw the lawsuit right now. You sign a document admitting your guilt and renouncing any future contact, and then you disappear from this city. And if I don't? Valeria tried to challenge, though her voice was barely a whisper. If not first thing tomorrow morning, this video will be on every national news channel, and then I'll hand it to the district attorney. You won't be going to a luxury hotel, Valeria. You will be going to a women's prison. And believe me, in there they don't like women who abuse disabled children. Valeria looked at her lawyer, searching for help. Lopez snapped his briefcase shut with a final click. Mr. Aragon, do you have a pen? The lawyer asked. My client will sign whatever is needed. We are withdrawing from the case immediately after this. Valeria signed. Her hands were shaking so much that the signature was illegible, but legal. She walked out of this mansion 5 minutes later alone, without a lawyer and without dignity. Julian watched her go from the window, feeling the last dark chapter of his life close. But the real battle, the important one, was happening somewhere else. 2 days later, at this country's most advanced neurological rehabilitation center, the air smelled of chlorine and hard work. Matteo was in the hydrotherapy pool. The water came up to his chest. Julian was right there in the water with him, holding him up by the waist. In front of them, the therapist, a young, energetic woman named Sophia, clapped her hands. Come on, Matteo. I know it hurts, but you are strong. Push with your right foot. Push. Matteo was weeping. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of frustration and physical pain. His withered muscles burned as they tried to wake up after years of forced sleep. I can't, Dad, I can't, Matteo sobbed, dropping his head onto Julian's wet shoulder. Julian held him tight, feeling the small body trembling against his. His protective instinct screamed at him to pull him out of the water, take him home, wrap him in blankets, and save him from any suffering. But true love, the mature love he had learned in these weeks, knew that sometimes you have to allow constructive pain to bring about healing. Look at me, son, Julian said, lifting Matteo's chin so he would meet his eyes. Water splashed onto his face. Remember the storm. Remember what I promised you. Matteo nodded, sniffing back tears. I promised I would always be here, and here I am. I am your legs now, but I need you to be the engine. Just one step, Matteo. Just try to move that toe. For Mom, for us. Matteo closed his eyes and gritted his teeth. His face turned red with effort as he focused on his right leg, that limb that felt so distant and foreign. Under the water, Julian felt something. It was faint, almost a spasm, but it was voluntary. A nudge, a muscle contraction in Matteo's thigh. That's it! Sophia the therapist shouted excitedly. You did it! There was movement. Julian burst into a euphoric laugh, lifting Matteo high into the air, pulling him out of the water like a trophy as if they'd just won the World Cup. "You did it, champ! You really did it!" Julian shouted, spinning around with him in the water. Mateo, caught up in his dad's explosive joy, started laughing too. It was a real loud, childlike laugh that echoed off the pool tiles. It was the sound of victory. Not victory against Valeria, but victory against giving up. That night on the way home, Mateo fell asleep in the car, completely exhausted. Julian drove with one hand on the wheel and the other holding his son's hand. He glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Rosario in the back seat dozing off with a peaceful smile. Julian thought about his ships, his millions, and his old worries about oil prices. It all seemed so meaningless now. The real wealth was right there in the car with him. He had gotten his family back. And even though the road to physical recovery would be long and full of hard days, he didn't care anymore. He had time. He had all the time in the world. 6 months had passed. Winter had given way to a vibrant spring, and the garden of the Aragao mansion, once the scene of a quiet tragedy, had transformed into a paradise of life. It was Sunday. The air was filled with the unmistakable smell of burning charcoal and roasting meat. There were no gourmet chefs or uniformed waiters. At the brick grill recently built on the patio, Don Julian Arago, wearing beige shorts, a navy blue polo shirt, and an apron that said King of the Grill, a gift from Mateo, was battling some sausages that were threatening to burn. "Sir, flip them over, or we're going to be eating charcoal again," Rosario shouted from the picnic table where she was chopping a fresh salad. The old woman wasn't wearing a uniform anymore. She had on a comfortable floral dress and sandals. Her gray hair was loose over her shoulders, making her look years younger. She wasn't the maid anymore. She was the honorary matriarch, the grandmother who scolded the millionaire with total impunity. "I've got everything under control, Rosario," Julian replied, laughing as he fought off the smoke getting in his eyes. "It's a special smoking technique, Argentine style or something." From the other side of the garden, a sharp, happy bark rang out. A golden retriever puppy, a ball of golden fur named Rayo, was running clumsily after a tennis ball, and following the dog was the miracle. Mateo wasn't in the wheelchair anymore. The German wheelchair had been donated to a children's hospital a month ago. Now, Mateo was moving around using a bright red reverse walker. His legs, though still thin, had visible muscle definition. He was wearing shorts that proudly showed the scars of his battle, and his sneakers were worn out from constant use, not from neglect. "Rayo, come here," Mateo called out. His voice was strong and clear, without a trace of the fear that had silenced it before. The dog ignored the command and kept running toward Julian. Mateo huffed with amusement and adjusted his grip on the walker. "Dad Rayo's gonna steal a sausage," Mateo warned, inching his way step by step along the stone path. Every step was a feat of engineering and will. Lift, step, plant. Lift, step, plant. But Mateo did it with a determination that amazed the doctors. Julian turned around just in time to see the puppy jumping up, trying to reach the grill. He gently nudged him away with his foot. "Down, you beast!" Julian laughed, tossing him a piece of bread to distract him. Then he looked at his son, watching him for a moment, letting the image burn into his memory forever. Mateo, walking under the sun, sweating a little but smiling. Julian felt that familiar tightness in his chest, that mix of love and gratitude that sometimes made it hard to breathe. "Do you need some help, son?" Julian asked, instinctively taking a step toward him. Mateo stopped, took a deep breath, and shook his head. "No, I've got this. I want to make it to the table on my own." Julian nodded and stepped back, respecting his son's wish. "I've got this." Those words were worth more than any contract he had ever signed in his life. Mateo kept going. 5 meters, 3 meters, 1 meter. He reached the picnic table and collapsed onto the wooden bench with a sigh of relief, wiping the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "You made it," Rosario said, pouring him a tall glass of cold lemonade. "You're a champion, my boy." "I almost fell over by the roses," Mateo admitted, taking a long gulp. "But I remembered what the therapist said: if you fall, just look up at the sky and get back up." Julian brought over the platter of meat, slightly burnt at the edges but still edible, and sat down next to them. He served the plates with a simplicity that would have horrified the old Valeria, but to them it felt like the ultimate luxury. They ate amidst laughter, talking about small things, the movie they'd watched that night, the dog's antics, and their plans to plant a vegetable garden next month. As Mateo handed him a piece of, slipping a sausage to Rayo under the table, Julian leaned back on the bench and looked up at the mansion's facade. It didn't look like a marble tomb anymore. Now it was a home. He saw the open windows, the curtains dancing in the breeze. He remembered the day he came home early. He remembered the impulse that almost made him stay at the airport for just one more meeting. If he hadn't taken that flight, if he hadn't arrived that day, A shiver ran down his spine despite the heat. He looked at Mateo alive, recovering happy. He looked at Rosario, peaceful and respected. "What are you thinking about, Dad?" Mateo asked, noticing his father's sudden silence. Julian turned his gaze back to his son. His eyes glistened with unshed tears, tears of a happiness so deep it actually hurt. "I was thinking about time, Mateo," Julian answered softly, "about how curious it is. I spent my whole life running trying to gain time to save time to get to business deals early. And in the end, the only time arriving early actually mattered wasn't to make money, it was to save you." Mateo smiled, a smile that lit up the whole garden identical to his mother's. He reached his hand across the table and squeezed his father's hand. "I'm glad you came, Dad." Julian squeezed his son's hand back, feeling the strength growing in it day by day. "Me too, son. Me too." The camera slowly zooms out toward the blue sky, revealing the garden full of life. The father, the son, and the adopted grandmother sharing bread together. As the dog runs around, the darkness of ambition and cruelty has completely vanished, replaced by the simple, powerful light of presence. The end.